Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with the best easy shrimp enchiladas. That's right, the secret to making these shrimp enchiladas easy and the best is the addition of something we might have made fun of our parents for using in a casserole. And of course, I'm talking about canned soup. But like so many other things, when we do it, it's okay. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the other star of the show. And that would be a couple pounds of some big, beautiful peeled and deveined shrimp, and raw shrimp to be exact. And what we'll do is season those very simply with a big pinch of salt, plus a little shake of cayenne. And then we'll go ahead and give that a thorough tossing with our tongs before we head to the stove, where we have a skillet set over medium-high heat, to which I've added about a tablespoon of avocado oil, although any kind of high heat oil will work. And what we'll do is sear these shrimp very quickly on both sides. And by the way, we're going to want to do this in a single layer, so we'll do it in batches, since if we dump all the shrimp in, they'll just start to boil in their own juices, which is not going to get us what we're really after. And as I remove this first batch from the pan, you're going to see exactly what that is. And in the business, we call it a fond, but it's that caramelized goodness on the bottom of the pan that we get when we sear or pan fry protein. So yes, we're improving the flavor of the shrimp, but much more importantly, we're improving the flavor of the pan. And after that first batch is removed, we'll probably want to add a little more oil to the pan and swirl that around before we add the rest. So that's exactly what I did. And then I seared the rest exactly the same way. And then once we eventually have all our shrimp seared, and they've been removed to a bowl or plate, we can transfer those into the fridge until we're ready to use them. And yes, we'll also want to remove any rogue tail shells if we see them. And once our shrimp are set, we can lower our heat to medium, at which point we can transfer in our diced poblano peppers, or the pepper of your choice, as well as some diced onion, and of course a nice big pinch of salt, which is not just to season, but as you may know, that's going to draw moisture out of the vegetables, which is going to start to dissolve and release that goodness from the bottom of the pan. And that always adds a tremendous amount of extra flavor to whatever we're making. And what we'll do is cook those veggies stirring for a few minutes, or until those onions start to soften up a little bit and turn translucent. And once that's been accomplished, and things are looking a little something like this, we can go ahead and add our spices, starting with some kind of dried chili powder. And it's going to kind of look like I just added some cocoa, since I'm using the dark and mysterious ground ancho chili. But any chili will work. We will also toss in some smoked paprika, some ground cumin, a little bit of ground chipotle, followed by some freshly ground black pepper, and then last but not least, a little bit of dried oregano, preferably Mexican, but oregano from anywhere will work. And we'll go ahead and give everything a stir, and then cook this for another couple minutes, just to kind of wake up those spices, and continue to soften and sweeten those veggies. And then what we need to do at this point before we go any further is remove exactly 8 spoonfuls of this mixture to a bowl. And that's because we're going to make 8 enchiladas. And we want some of this inside with the cheese and shrimp. So we'll remove some of that now and set it aside. And then after that, we'll go ahead and add a nice big splash of water, which will prevent the bottom from caramelizing any further. And I know it does look dark, but it's not burnt. That's mostly from my chili powder being so dark. But anyway, we'll toss in some water, which is going to further deglaze the bottom. And then we'll continue on by adding some minced garlic, which we could have added with the spices if we hadn't forgotten. But in this kind of thing, that's not really a big deal. And then we'll follow that up with our secret ingredient, a couple cans of store-bought lobster bisque, which, yes, looks absolutely dreadful. In fact, make sure no one is in the kitchen when you add that. And at this point, I'm going to go ahead and give that a stir, since I can barely stand to look at it. And what we'll do is go ahead and turn our heat up to medium-high. And of course, anytime we use a canned or jarred product, we always want to rinse out the inside with a little bit of cold fresh water, and then go ahead and add that in. And the good news is, as this heats up and we whisk everything together, it's going to smooth out and look significantly better. And then once this mixture does start to simmer, we can reduce our heat to medium, at which point we'll let it simmer for about 5 minutes or so. And then depending on which brand of lobster bisque you bought, we might want to add in a tablespoon or 2 of tomato paste. Okay, some bisques are very tomatoey, and we might not need this. But the one I used was on the creamy side and didn't have much, so I did add some tomato paste to mine. But I trust you, so I'm going to let you be the judge. But anyway, I stirred that in, and like I said, we'll let this simmer for about 5 minutes or so. Oh, and I almost forgot. At some point while this is simmering, we'll want to take our shrimp out of the fridge, and we will pour in any and all accumulated juices, which people that don't know how to cook would throw away. But that ain't us. And that's it. After simmering for about 5 minutes, our sauce is done, and all we have left to do would be to turn off the heat, and of course taste it for seasoning, as well as stir in the last ingredient, some freshly chopped cilantro. And once that's been stirred in, and we're completely happy with everything about the sauce, we can go ahead and grab a ladle, and then very, very carefully transfer about half into the bottom of whatever baking dish we're going to use, which for me is this 15 by 10 inch casserole. And I know it wasn't pretty, but by using that canned lobster bisque, not only did we avoid making a homemade creamy enchilada sauce from scratch, but you know what lobster bisque tastes like? Really good extra sweet shrimp bisque. So yes, we save time, but we're also going to get some extra delicious flavor, I think. So we will ladle half in now and save the rest for the top, at which point we can move on to rolling up our enchiladas, which are going to start with some flour tortillas, ideally about 6 to 7 inches in size. And before we stuff, I like to brush both sides with a little bit of avocado oil, which kind of waterproofs them, and I believe gives us a better texture once baked. And then once that's set, we'll apply some freshly shredded cheese, and I'm going with half cheddar, half Monterey Jack. And then we'll top that with 4 shrimp, which we will place nice and tightly together. And then we will grab our reserved onions and pepper mixture, and we'll place a spoon over the top, although it might not stay on the top, but it doesn't matter, since we're going to be rolling everything up. But before we do, let's top that with a little more cheese, and then we can go ahead and carefully roll this up, which we want to do fairly tightly, but not too tightly, otherwise our tortilla might rip, which would make it a tortilla. But we don't want a tortilla, so be careful. And as usual, we'll want to end up with a seam on the bottom. And that's it. Once rolled, we'll carefully pick that up, and we'll transfer it on top of our sauce, and then we'll go ahead and do that 7 more times. And this is such a simple recipe. I actually think the hardest part is figuring out how to fit these in your dish or pan. Okay, I don't have anything that has the right shape and size where I could fit 8 in a row, which would be better for my brain. But I can fit 6, which leaves just enough room to fit the other 2 going the other way. And yes, if you have to, you could just use 2 smaller dishes and put 4 in each, and just divide the sauce between the 2, and that will totally work. And then speaking of sauce, let's go ahead and top these evenly with the rest. And once we've done that, we will finish up by adding some more shredded cheese to the top, which for me at least is not going to be a ton. Or hey, you go ahead and add as much as you want. I mean, you are after all the Victor Wembanyama of how much cheese to put on a. But we put a decent amount inside, and I don't like when there's a solid layer of cheese on the top of one of these things, and you can't even tell there's enchiladas underneath. So I'm just going to apply a relatively light sprinkling. And that's it. Once cheesed, these are ready to transfer into the center of a 450-degree oven for about 20 to 25 minutes, or until the top starts to brown and our sauce is bubbling, and it hopefully looks like this. Oh yeah, check it out. Because we did not over-cheese, this actually looks like a gorgeous dish of baked enchiladas. And then for best results, we should probably let this rest for about 10 minutes before serving, just to let things firm up a little bit. And while that was happening, I went ahead and garnished the top with some thinly sliced jalapeno rings, plus some nice thin slices of radish. And then I finished up with a sprinkling of cilantro. And after impatiently waiting for about 10 minutes, I grabbed a spoon and I served up. And I think one of these would be a perfectly sized portion for a normal person, which is why I'm going to plate up 2. And as you can see, if everything goes according to plan, we should have a good amount of extra sauce at the bottom of the dish. So after we plate up, we can spoon a little more of that over the top. And then there's 1,000 ways you could finish this. But the way I finished was by adding on some more jalapeno and radish. And then because these enchiladas are fairly rich, I think some fresh lime wedges on the side is a great idea, since the acidity is really going to brighten things up. And speaking of acidity, I am pretty much unable to eat enchiladas unless there's some sour cream on top. And then the same goes for a little splash of hot sauce. And then once I had that chalupa, I finished up with some cilantro. And what I'm calling the best easy shrimp enchiladas were ready to enjoy. So I squeezed over a little bit of lime, and I grabbed a fork and dug in. And that, my friends, without a doubt, is the best shrimp enchilada you will ever taste. Or I guaranteed, or your money back. And it sounds kind of funny to describe this as tasting rich and meaty, but thanks to that fabulous fond we formed in the pan when we started, and of course our secret ingredient lobster bisque, this really does have a much more savory and deeper flavor than your typical much lighter shrimp enchilada. And yes, of course you can use corn tortillas instead, but I do much prefer the flour tortillas, just as long as you don't forget to brush them with a little bit of oil, which I think helps them maintain a very pleasant texture. And believe it or not, we end up with something that's almost pasta-like. Oh, and as you're watching me take these fairly big bites, you might be thinking, shouldn't we cut the shrimp in half to make these a little easier to eat? Well, you certainly could, and I wouldn't say not to, but that just adds a step. And if I was sitting in front of these, eating them like a civilian, instead of reaching across the counter, I wouldn't have much trouble cutting these shrimp in half with my fork. So don't be fooled by me making these look hard to eat. And I really think the whole shrimp is the way to go. But whether you cut your shrimp or not, or maybe sneak on a little more cheese, or add something to the inside I didn't even think of, I truly think these are incredible, and I really do hope you give them a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.